All right, I've been saying it for a year, but Houston broke the Kansas State Wildcats. Right, Christian?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It is a crossover edition of Locked On Coogs and Locked On Wildcats. I'm one of your hosts, Parker Ainsworth of Locked On Coogs, joined by Christian Rauh of Locked On Kansas State. And Christian, we got a lot of stuff to get into today. Big 12 things, national conversation things. I want to hit something a little bit more local first about Houston breaking Kansas State and where that puts folks. Now, before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So if we persuade you over the course of today's show, whether we're talking about Fritz breaking Kansas State, what these new transfer portal rules might do, or at the end we make some picks on the big noon games in the Iron Skillet, make sure you head over to FanDuel to make the most of your action. But Christian, I said Houston broke Kansas State probably 30 times in the last 6 weeks. And look, peek behind the kimono here. You texted me saying, I think it happens.
Yeah, man, I've tried to bury this narrative that you have had for quite some time, and we've made these jokes back and forth talking about the potential of this actually happening. But look, it's hard to disagree with this debate now. I've gone throughout the entire offseason when I explain how last season worked. I say that, Kansas State started season 7-1 until the wheels fell off against Houston. Like, that is how I explained the season of last year. Well, unfortunately, it sounds like those wheels were put back on of Kansas State, but they were square wheels. Matt Wells decides to put on square wheels of the offense, and he doesn't find a way to make this running game work. He finds out to make Avery Johnson a shell of himself and not run the football. There's just a lot of concerns with this Kansas State offense and generally the entire team. And if you have to point a finger at it, I think it is right when that loss happened in Houston, against Houston.
So for the folks that maybe are new to the programs, maybe you're a freshman, just got there, like, what are you talking about from a year ago? Houston, of their 4 wins last season, did beat Kansas State in year 1 under Willie Fritz, 24-19. It was an ugly game played in Houston. There was some weather stuff before it started, and Houston played a couple of quarterbacks in it. Donovan Smith, I think, was more of a goal line package kind of guy in this game, but they played a couple of quarterbacks, and Avery Johnson couldn't get anything going for Kansas State. Kansas State was ranked 17th at the time. Houston was, I guess, technically 3-5 at the time, and was like they had to win out to make a bowl. They did not win a bowl. Spoiler. And at the time, I felt like a gigantic win for the Houston program, for Willie Fritz, for the culture they were building, because it was a gritty, grimy, and bluntly a win that Dana Holgorsen the year before could not get. They got blanked. It was ugly in Kansas State the year prior. Christian, you mentioned that Kansas State has looked worse this year. They did have a bowl win in there over Rutgers, and I don't want to move too quickly past that.
No.
But I don't know that a bowl win over Rutgers is necessarily the marquee win you won of the last 8 months, right? That seems low, like a low bar.
No, you're correct, but I will say there was so many amazing things you could take from that game. For the record, if you want to include this bowl game, as of right now, if you're including the loss to Army, the loss to Arizona last Friday for Kansas State, including the bowl game, they're 3-6 once that Houston game started. Including the Houston game, they've been 3-6, 2-6, not including that bowl game. But talking about that bowl game against Rutgers, obviously when you think of the Scarlet Knights, you're not thinking world beaters, but they had to come back in that game, actually. They were down at halftime. They had to come back, and they had it with what seemed to be a Matt Wells run offense, something that has been a huge criticism and huge concern for Kansas State so far this season. They had Dylan Edwards, who has been hurt. It's only played about 1% of the offensive snaps this year. Not saying that should be the only excuse on your team. You have to make adjustments. But Dylan Edwards was absolutely electric. He rushed for almost 200 yards in that bowl game. Jace Brown, they found some creative things for him to do, using jet sweeps, things like that. We finally saw a little glimpse of that in Arizona this past Friday. And Avery Johnson made some really good plays to get themselves back in the football game. The defense was amazing. At least I wouldn't say amazing, but they found a way to step up. And some of the guys that we're starting to see in the secondary, like Zayshawn Rich, Donovan McIntosh, doing some good things, had their first shine in the Rate Bowl game. So overall, there was a lot of great things to take from it. And it set up, in my opinion, a huge momentum curve in the upward swing during the offseason. You started off with this comeback win. You had a huge recruiting class that was one of the best in program history, including the top recruit in program history in Lincoln Cure. And then you bring in what seemed to be a good transfer portal, Parker, with high retention, with some good players, some honorable mentions of Power 4 levels like Big Ten honorable mention offensive linemen. None of it's just panned out. And it's been really upsetting. Of course, you can talk about the Dublin streak, the Dublin issues that have happened in week 0, but almost losing to North Dakota, losing the Army, and then losing to Arizona, a team that we have predicted at the Locked On Podcast Network towards the bottom of the Big 12 standings this year. It's a tough look for Kansas State.
Tough look. Now, look, Houston on the inverse they didn't win another game that season last year. That was their 4th win. They finished at 4-8. Tough losses down the stretch to Baylor and BYU to miss bowl eligibility. However, I would point out that like Baylor, Sawyer Robertson, and BYU is pretty darn good, obviously. And
I agree.
And so, that's the way that goes. Houston started off this year like gangbusters, 3-0, doing things they're supposed to do against teams they're supposed to do it to. Big win over Dion and Coach Prime last Friday. It does feel like part of the mojo or the culture on this Houston team is like, hey, if we can take down a top 20 team when no one sees it coming, we can beat anyone. And it's not that they've beaten everyone since, but I do think that has carried over. But football is a copycat sport, and you watch Kansas State much more closely than my audience and I, and you've watched some of these painful wins and losses. And I guess I want to ask, is there something like Houston, Willie Fritz is a defensive-minded guy. That's his background. Is there something that Houston just showed everyone? Is it that simple? Is it something that Houston showed about Avery Johnson that you're like, okay, everyone is attacking Avery this way. We can't get the offense going because of that. Is it an external thing that everyone figured out, or is it more internal than that?
I wish I had that answer, because I feel like if I had that answer, the coaching staff would too. But I don't. When you go back to that game, Kansas State outperformed Houston when it came to total offensive yards, 327 to 232. They lost the turnover battle. Was it that simple? Was that the way that they just lost that game, because of the turnover battle? They won in time possession, something that Kansas State can't find a way to do this season. Kansas State can't get the defense off the field. Going back to the Army game, the entire second half, basically, it felt like Army had the football. And you look at the time of possession, that absolutely happened. This last Friday, Arizona had 83 offensive snaps to only Kansas State's 53. I mean, there's just a lot of things that defense can't get off the field. Time possession has been an issue for Kansas State. So when you're looking at last year's game between Houston and Kansas State, there's nothing that sticks out of the page. There's nothing there. I mean, passing, Houston didn't. I mean, if you look at it back now, I don't even remember this, but Houston went 12 for 12 on passing. Like, I don't even remember that.
12 whole passes, though.
12 whole passes. That's it. That's all it took for them to win this game 24-19. It's just insane. But I'll flip side it for you. I know you had 3 straight losses after this, but it gave a little bit of momentum. As you mentioned, they were the 17th ranked team in the country when they did lose to Houston. Was this the turning point for Willie Fritz to show, hey, look, this is a program that can compete with the top dogs in the Big 12? Because that's where Kansas State was sitting at the time when they were 7-1.
Yeah, they were a favorite to win the conference. And frankly, if we're being honest, I think I'd picked them to win the conference at that point. I will say I think it's made people way more comfortable with the way Houston's winning now. Houston's winning game now with a lot of running of the football. Even Connor Wigman's getting on the action, running the football, and playing defense first, clock control, those kinds of things. And there's been a weird like proof of concept because they took out a time. It's not just, okay, yeah, did they against Stephen F. Austin, but what are you going to do? It's like, no, it also worked with lesser talented athletes when they had to go up against Kansas State a year ago. So theoretically, it should be working the same now with more talented athletes. They hit the transfer portal pretty hard, which we'll talk about in the second segment, spoiler. But I think that has worked out pretty well for Willie. Now, Christian, last question before I stop, twisting the knife, so to speak.
Tooting your horn?
Yeah, a little bit. Look, obviously they put Humpty Dumpty back together again. If Houston and Willie Fritz broke Kansas State, what puts it back together?
Right now, it's tough to say. I think there's multiple pieces still missing. I think that's one of those jigsaw puzzles that are maybe 1,000 pieces and you're missing about 10, Parker. Offense needs to step up. They need to find an identity, something that Chris Kleiman says he doesn't have right now. That's a huge concern when you're already 4 games into the season and you're talking about a team that was a Big 12 champion just a few years ago under Chris Kleiman. You're talking about a program that has the historic legacy of Bill Snyder. When you're talking about you're a third of the way through the season and you don't have an identity, that's a big problem. So I don't know if there is truly one piece to fix the puzzle. I think there's a couple answers, and I think some of them might be hidden deep under the couch.
All right, I lied. Actual last question. Is this even a segment topic if Edwards doesn't turn his ankle to open up the season?
I don't know.
I just felt like that turned that game entirely, and I don't mean to, again, belabor too much. You mentioned single pieces and puzzles, and a whole lot of that just changed and how you put your puzzle together that is your roster. Well, I want to talk about that in the second segment and some of the changes that is. But before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at DoorDash, because it's almost the weekend. It's Thursday. We're going into the weekend. It's time to look back and crown last week's MVP, who delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks. Save more every time you order. These players deliver when mattered most. Let's break it down. I'm not going to ask Christian to go too in-depth on something he probably doesn't want to talk about. So we're going to stick with Connor Wigman as the guy that was last week's MVP. He ran it. He threw it. He did all kinds of things. He left a guy in his in cement blocks as he scooted in the end zone. Highlight of the week kind of play for the Houston Cougars. Connor Wigman delivered in a big way, big touchdowns, and all kinds of big-time leadership performances. Man, the guy looks like he's having fun out there. No hesitation, no delays, and they've been waiting week after week. You probably understand this isn't a fluke, just the next game on the schedule. Connor Wigman's on a streak. There's no way around it. And just like Connor Wigman delivered for the Coogs, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order. Stack up all season long. You can save $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streaks alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo goes all the way through November 18th. Today's show is also brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel, because the NFL season is here, college football is here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can put just $5 down. If your bet hits, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. We're going to be talking picks and stuff later with big noon games in the Big 12, the Iron Skillet, trying to keep that in the Big 12 as well. But on top of all that, if you have a hunch on the Coogs, the Wildcats, anything, make sure you check out FanDuel to get in on the action. They're ready to play. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Parker Ainsworth here with Christian Rauh, Locked On Coogs and Locked On Kansas State, crossing over to break down the biggest news across the country in this segment. We're going to zoom out for a second, look at the transfer portal and all the inner workings of that. Ross Dellinger tweeted that the NCAA Administrative Committee decided to eliminate the spring transfer football portal window, but left undecided the exact length and timing of a single fall portal window, sources tell Yahoo Sports. A decision on details of the fall portal is expected within the month. The committee also adopted the move to make December a dead period and January 5th through 31st a contact period in the FBS, source told Yahoo Sports. It also changed the date a high school senior can receive a written offer from August 1st to November 15th. Christian, we just talked about a team that might need some new pieces in the Kansas State Wildcats. That whole landscape just changed.
Yeah, it changed for the big time. And I have a feeling that Kansas State's going to be, especially if they don't turn around this season, they're going to be very busy in the portal with players leaving and, eventually definitely coming in. And if this all happens in one time, I know that we've seen some things happen before this Ross Dellinger tweet about the idea of potentially only being a 10-day window in the beginning of January. And of course, he did say that details are going to actually change within the next month. So we don't know that for sure. But if that is the case, then, man, imagine how crazy those 10 days are going to be. You might as well get some sleep in early, Parker, because you're not going to be sleeping. I mean, we're talking about multiple episodes coming out across every Locked On College channel because of the players leaving and entering the portal. It's going to be absolutely insane. But I don't know if I like it yet. I do like the fact of it maybe having a little bit more structure, and the fact that we were running into this issue in the summertime, spring heading into the summer window-ish, if you will, about the 105 roster size. Now that we're finally getting that type of consistency, maybe that alone might make me be okay with it. But either way, it's going to be hectic. It's going to be chaos, but I'm all for it. Chaos, at least. I'm all for the chaos part.
The chaos for sure. And I think it's interesting. Like Houston in the spring transfer portal window last transfer portal season was kind of a double-edged sword. They brought in Tanner Kogel at the end of the spring transfer portal window after he'd gone from Ball State to Wisconsin initially. He's our leading receiver this year as a tight end. I think that worked out pretty well. Houston Cougar fans are also quick to point out that they lost 3 defensive backs over the course of the spring, 2 of which were within hours on both ends before and after the spring game was played. And those 3 guys are all playing at teams, Florida State, Miami, and LSU, that are like top tier defenses right now. Those guys could be on this Houston Cougar team in a lot of ways. I struggle with what to go back, and I feel like if you play the spring, it feels like you ought to stick with that program. I get that aspect of this. I also get that if the spring doesn't work out, you might want to move. I get that aspect of it as well. I hate to tell Houston Cougar fans, if they got outbid on guys that went to LSU and Florida State in May, they probably would have also gotten outbid on those guys in January. They might just have left earlier. And I'm interested in a couple aspects of this, but you mentioned in pre-pod, again, peeking behind kimonos again, that you're intrigued by the high school senior part of this. I'll put this back on the screen for the video, folks, but high school senior can receive a written offer from August 1st, as it currently stands, all the way through November 15th.
Yeah, that's insane. Now you can only receive the offer from the 1st to the 15th. I mean, that is interesting, because that might mean that you get those written offers at a different time period compared to when the season actually starts. You might already have a 1-3 team. Like, I don't know, a certain program might be 1-3, and you usually could lose those decommitments, right? Let's look at Virginia Tech and UCLA, a perfect example of their coach firings. UCLA lost, I think, 8 or 9 decommits this past week because of the firings. Now, that's a complete exaggeration of a thought process here, but if they don't have the written letters, then that's never even an offer yet. You're going to maybe potentially get those written offers later on in the wintertime, the late fall, when you already know the status of a team. That could maybe potentially change how many decommitments we have. It might actually make the traffic of the high school player a little less. We might not talk about the high school player as much, which could be a drastic thing for the high school player. Not actually getting the hype could hurt them on NAL, especially because there's a single transfer portal window going. I think that if there's one group of players, if we're looking at exactly right now, with a potential single transfer portal in the wintertime, it sounds like, right at the beginning of the year, and then with the fact that these high schools written offers are changing and being more of a solidified type of time frame, grad transfers sound like they're going to be the ones that win the most out of this. Because look, you talked about injuries, you talked about bringing players in the summertime. What if a certain player sits through the spring, they find out that they are not going to be a vital piece of that puzzle, or they can find a better spot moving forward? Grad transfers can still leave anytime once they graduate. That's something that hasn't changed, at least for what we know of at this moment. So it sounds like that might be the most beneficial for a single transfer portal, is grad transfers. And that's something that teams like Houston and Kansas State need to take the best advantage of.
That, or having lawyers like Diego Pavia, because apparently that works out really well. They're going to he may not take it, but they may give him another year of eligibility at the end of this whole thing.
I heard a really funny thing the other day. Who actually plays college athletics longer, Diego Pavia or Chad Barker-Mazzara? Like, who does it? Who's it going to
be? Who does it? Christian, you can tell me this because y'all have been in a more competitive bowl situation in the transfer portal era as Kansas State folks than Houston has. But it feels like to me as an outsider that if there's transfer portal stuff happening while teams are in the college football playoff, and Houston hopes to be in that at some point in the not so distant future, that feels like a big disadvantage for the teams that are good. Am I crazy?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think we already saw that happen even with multiple transfer portal windows just this past season. Remember the backup quarterback for Penn State, who I think is the Missouri quarterback now? That was a big piece of a conversation when we should have been only focusing on Penn State in the college football playoffs. But instead, we're focusing on the backup quarterback having to do what is best for him and move on because they knew Drew Aller was going to be there that next season. He wanted to find a nice path, and he had to leave his team. Kansas State brought in multiple players in the transfer portal from Ohio State. George Fitzpatrick, Gabe Powers being some. It is a complete direct impact for Kansas State and the national champions. So I do think that this doesn't help player or teams going into the college football playoffs. But when you're talking 136 programs, and then you're talking 12, potentially only 16 on the other, it's this or the other. Of course, you have to focus on when school starts as well. Athletics doesn't dictate that, but of course, you have to find ways to make the rules work and make sense in that aspect. As much as we would like to say the only thing that matters is college football, college basketball, college athletics on this show, there's a lot of other things turning the keys, Parker.
Well, yeah, and part of the interesting thing about the UCLA situation, and you should go check out other shows across the network. I mean, Locked On Bruins and Locked On College Football, some of the UCLA stuff too. They haven't started classes yet, actually, because they're on the quarter system. So that adds intrigue versus the Virginia Tech situation, where they obviously have because they're on semesters, and how that plays in this whole thing. Speaking of playing this whole thing, there are games this weekend. If you hadn't heard, I want to talk about those with you in just a second. But if you're going to make a trip to one of these games, you might be driving. If you're driving, Christian, you might be driving a Mazda.
And Mazda crafts cars for those who do simply just move. And Mazda delivers confidence for every ride with more IHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. You can feel, and I'm telling you, you can feel the Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. With that all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. So like our players, especially the Coogs being 3-0 right now, every detail matters, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved.
Christian, now Houston would like to be playing this weekend and keep things going. I think Kansas State is probably relieved to not be playing this weekend.
Iffy. It's the 4-game mark, with that whole dreadful red shirt issue, transfer portal thing coming up. We haven't heard any news yet, but it's a weird time for a bye week.
But fans, I think, get to sit around and enjoy some good football this weekend. And while I would laugh if Tulsa upset Oklahoma State, that would probably be bad for the conference, and I would regret that later. But that would be funny. The game of the weekend for the Big 12 Conference is the one that's going to be on national television in a lot of ways, right? It is Texas Tech at Utah. It is kicking off at noon Eastern. It's the big noon kickoff game on Fox. I believe it's the two highest ranked teams in the conference. Still, 16 and 17 in the AP poll.
No, I think Iowa State's got them
by a little bit,
but they're not playing this week.
Not playing this weekend. And I say that to say that this needs to be an entertaining game, and it also probably means that one of them, as far as like the national conversation, is going to get left out afterwards, right? What are you making of Utah and Tech this weekend?
Yeah, well, look, you got to, I continue to say this on my show, and it's more of just a hopeful kind of conversation. The two teams that went to Arlington were 7-2. Now, there were some tiebreakers involved, things like that. As an 0-1 in the Big 12, I have to continue to keep that hope up. Statistically, Kansas State can still make it to Arlington. Realistically, most likely, probably not. So you can't say that just because they lose this football game, they're going to be out of it. But it's huge when it comes to tiebreaker implications, something that most definitely happened last year in Arlington. Kansas State has to play both these teams. They play Texas Tech in Manhattan, and they play Utah in Salt Lake City. I know you only have to play Texas Tech this year, so you would think that you'd probably want Utah to win this game so you can take care of Texas Tech in the tiebreaker. Wouldn't that be correct?
Well, and Houston gets Texas Tech in a couple weeks, October 4th. It's going to be a big deal. They've already announced it's going to be the Houston Blue Jersey Oiler-themed kind of game. I can't tell if it's better for Tech to have taken a loss, or for, let's say, Tech just rolls them and is feeling a little too high in my. I don't know which one works better. I will say I'm going to be taking copious notes at noon on Saturday about what Texas Tech looks like. I don't know what to make of this game from a picks perspective right now,
What was
because
your thought perspective on Devin Dampier heading into this season? Because I so far was completely wrong. I did not have him as a top quarterback in the conference.
I didn't, and I felt really vindicated the first half of that Wyoming game. I wasn't very high, and frankly, I about halftime Wyoming, I was like, "Ha, see, this is what I thought," and then I was like, "Oh, I might have been wrong on that one." He warmed up a little bit. To be fair, though, I think Baron Morton has also proved me wrong. I was like, "Okay, you spent all this money and got him all these weapons, but he's still Baron Morton, and he's putting up 60 and stuff against bad teams, but like he's doing it through the air, right?" So,
Yeah.
I I think I lean into Tech getting it done, but that may be the Lone Star State Texan in me. As a closer to neutral observer, you got to play both these teams. What are you picking here? What are you thinking?
Yeah, Tech has really acted like a world beater so far, but I think Utah has had the tougher test so far. Even though UCLA hasn't been any good, there was some moments. Of course, Utah playing some other teams very close in the games. Wyoming potentially could be a little better than we thought in the Mountain West. Who knows if that's the case? But Texas Tech and or they played Oregon State, even though there was a 2.5 hour weather delay. All that did was just extend the inevitable of Texas Tech putting the brakes on Oregon State. They've just been a mess of a team this year. I'm gonna lean towards Utah in this one. Play a devil's advocate on you just because I feel they're a little more tested. It's at home. There's this narrative that because it's early, Utah fans won't show up. I think their fans will take that to heart. And although Texas Tech did buy all that money and all those players, and they did do everything it's going to do, I think Kyle Whittingham finally has this team on the right spot. And as we mentioned earlier, with Dampier, us being down on him, I think he's going to prove us wrong again. So I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's going to be really close. I wouldn't touch either spread. I don't even know what it is, but I wouldn't touch it. But I think Utah wins this one by a hair.
And they're at home, and that's fair. A couple games I think we're probably in agreement on, at least from respect for the Big 12. A pair of teams playing other Power Four, other ACC games, and the first of which is, as a Lone Star State native, TCU and SMU in the Iron Skillet. When SMU was a Group of 5 team, they had set 2025 as the last year for the foreseeable future this game gets played. They have not altered that since SMU bought their way into a power conference. I guess you can't quite buy everything, including Iron Skillets, but I I I think we both want TCU to win. TCU looked great against North Carolina to start the year on that primetime game. Do you have any concerns in that one? I feel pretty good about it.
I think there's some concerns. I think you can definitely say, I mean, look what SMU did to Baylor at the beginning of that game. Obviously Baylor found a way to come back. Does SMU allow that to happen again for the second Big 12 opponent of the season? I think that gives some concerns. I think TCU could potentially be riding a little high too, maybe potentially be humbled against an SMU team. Whoever wins this game most likely will be ranked in the AP poll the following week, in my opinion. That's my guess, especially if it's TCU. I think they can get it done, but when we're talking about some of these teams and some of these games, this is definitely a concerning one. Would it shock me if SMU won? Not in the slightest, but I think TCU can get it done. I think Sonny Dykes is the better coach, and I think that is going to be the reason why they get it done.
And they're at home, and they've got purple corn dogs. I will say one thing we all win on is that if SMU wins, Drake has to fill a cavity with one of those, apparently. And we're going to hold him to that, Christian. If it happens, we're going to make Drake, host a Locked On Big 12, do that. I think TCU wins this game. I do think it's close. It's a rivalry game. They're 45 minutes apart. I think it's going to be a fun game.
I hate that it's at the same time as the Tech Utah game.
Right.
I hate that. Yeah.
Right. Quad box is great, but I want to put one of those with the audio so I can actually focus a little bit.
Same. Right
the 3:30 Eastern game is Central Florida hosting North Carolina. And I kind of just want to say the Big 12 owns Bill Belichick. Is there any possibility that happens?
I think there's a possibility for sure. I don't think so. UCF is the next one on Kansas State's schedule, so I'll be glued in to this game. And look, I think Scott Frost is going to get this team right. I just don't know if they're there yet. Of course, they have quarterback issues of their own. They've had one all off season with their position battle. They haven't looked amazing, although they haven't lost the game yet. Can Scott Frost shock the world? And that will be the most, if that happens, if TCU wins and UCF wins, UCF will be the most impressive win, because Scott Frost, what he's doing and building this team up after what happened last season, I think that'll be super impressive. Although North Carolina isn't what everybody expects them to be or everybody thought they were going to be just because of their head coach. I think if UCF can do that, not only is that scary for Kansas State after the bye week, that's very interesting for the rest of the Big 12. I mean, we might have had this backwards, right? We might have another Arizona State on our hands, of an Arizona or possibly a UCF. I don't know if I'm going to go that far, but still a lot of things to think about. But as much as I want to, just because I don't think we can always just go full chalk on Big 12. I don't think that's the best thing. I think North Carolina finally gets themselves corrected in that one.
Well, what's interesting is if UCF wins, it would be because of coaching, because the roster is not nearly as expensive or
I
invested
agree.
in.
I
And what's
agree, but
fascinating
neither
there
roster
is
is not that good.
no, but what's fascinating there is I think a month ago, if you'd asked anyone in America, they would have assumed Carolina was going to at least be better coached than Central Florida, right? Like they
Right.
might have said, okay, Bill Belichick's gonna need some adjustment time and all that, and they might not be Clemson or they might not be whatever, but they're gonna do all right in the ACC. If UCF wins that game, it's Scott Frost in a kind of building his self back up like a phoenix from the ashes
Yeah, the
defeats Bill
narrative changes
Belichick.
fast.
Like
The narrative
that's a
changes
whole
fast on Scott Frost.
because it won't be because of the roster. And I don't mean this as a slight to those
Right.
players. In
No.
North Carolina invested a lot of money in that roster. They brought in high dollar players at all the key positions. And got spanked on national TV once already. This game is on Fox, so it is also a national TV game. It's not quite primetime window. It's 3:30 Eastern. Big day, big weekend in the Big 12, and you and I, Christian, get to sit back and watch.
Yeah. I'm excited to be a college football sicko and not have to worry about a Kansas State game for once. I know a lot of my everydayers are hitting the golf course. Saw that in the comment section already. They're taking care of that probably for the last time before the weather turns. A perfect time to do so, but they can always come on back to our shows later on during the week and catch back on up because that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah, we're breaking all kinds of things down this week. We've taken a moment during the bye week on Locked On Coogs to do some basketball conversations as well, because Houston Cougar basketball is never far from mine. We actually had a second to breathe. We've enjoyed the win over Colorado thoroughly. We're looking forward to winning a couple more. So all kinds of things like that at Locked On Cougs. Locked On Kansas State, what's been going on in the bye week before we get out of here? Christian?
Yeah, just lots of stuff, man. With the bye week, always covering stuff, you name it. We probably should get some basketball content out. Maybe we'll get some special weekend episodes out for you as well, because there's plenty to talk about. Less than 6 weeks until the basketball season actually starts, not counting exhibition games. So lots of excitement coming up for the men's basketball and women's for Kansas State as well.
That's Christian Rauh of Locked On Kansas State. I'm Parker Angel of Locked On Coogs, bringing a crossover episode to both of your feeds. Remember to hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know when we're live. Looking for a second listen of the day. Locked On Big 12 covers the whole conference, including that Texas Tech and Utah game, very, very thoroughly. So go check them out as well. As always, I end it with a go Coogs. Is there a hand signal? I don't know. Go Coogs.
Thanks for listening.